I think you'll be our only witness.
All right.
Okay, Mr. Goldman, you're recognized for any amendment you care to offer or any remarks you care to make.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I do have an amendment that I believe is at the desk. May.
Certainly in order. The gentleman's recognized.
And essentially what this amendment does is it strikes every mention of the word scheme in the articles of impeachment. And the reason for this is there is no evidence, there is no proof of any scheme that we would understand from any variation of civil or criminal law. There has been no evidence, and I specifically asked this during the markup, of Secretary Mayorkas's intent or willfulness to disobey the law, and therefore there's certainly no evidence that there's any scheme or conspiracy of any sort to do so. I had the pleasure of listening to the last couple hours of questioning of the chairman and the ranking member, and there are a number of things that have been represented to this committee that are plainly false. First of all, there's no court that has made any ruling that determines there's no court that has definitively determined that any action by Secretary Mayorkas has been a willful or intentional violation of the law. Chairman Green and the articles reference 7 laws that have been violated. First of all, there's no court that has said that. In fact, there's a Sixth Circuit opinion that says the opposite. And what's, I think, particularly misleading is the reference to the Supreme Court case on United States versus Texas, which Chairman Green referenced and was referenced extensively in the markup as demonstrated as being reversed on standing only, and therefore the district court opinion, or rather the circuit court, Fifth Circuit opinion should therefore, the rationale should hold. I just want to read a quote from the majority opinion. It was an 8-1 decision, and it was written by Justice Kavanaugh. And he is discussing the executive branch discretion to enforce the law, and that the executive branch, especially when it comes to arrest or prosecution, has a broad discretion because, quote, 1, the executive branch invariably lacks the resources to arrest and prosecute every violator of every law, and 2, must constantly react and adjust to the ever-shifting public safety and public welfare needs of the people. This case, he goes on, illustrates the point. As the district court found, the executive branch does not possess the resources necessary to arrest or remove all of the non-citizens covered by the relevant statutes of the INA. That reality is not an anomaly, it is a constant. For the last 27 years, since those laws were enacted in their current form, all 5 presidential administrations have determined that resource constraints necessitated prioritization in making immigration arrests. So in other words, the Republican majority has set up an impossible standard that has never been met and cannot be met with the resources that the Department of Homeland Security possesses. Now, there was a lot of discussion of these guidelines that Secretary Mayorkas implemented to use his discretion, to utilize his resources in a effective, efficient, and the best way possible, because he cannot actually detain every single person who comes across the border. And when we talk about operational control, which I know Mr. Roy was dwelling on, based on the Secure Fence Act of 2006, in 2007, the Bush administration, Department of Homeland Security, issued guidelines that interpreted operational control in a manageable way that would allow the department to execute the laws faithfully without preventing every single unlawful immigrant from coming in the country, because that is, of course, an impossible standard that no Secretary of Homeland Security has ever met. So when Secretary Mayorkas talks about operational control, he is using the definition that was drafted and created and implemented by the Republican Bush administration and has been used ever since. The reason I'm going through all of this in rebutting the specific points that have been made is because this entire impeachment resolution is a fiction. It is a pure political fiction. It's not just a policy dispute, which is the best gloss on it. It's just factually incorrect. It's not even a policy dispute. Because a policy dispute is, for example, when President Biden and Secretary Mayorkas try to change the policy at the border to streamline the asylum process, to funnel people to the ports of entry, to prevent people from making that hundreds of miles trek to the border and doing it within their own country to either apply for asylum or for a visa. When they do that, Republican attorneys general file lawsuits against the administration to prevent them from implementing policy to address the border. That is what has happened over the last 3 years. So you have Republican attorneys general who are filing lawsuits to prevent Secretary Mayorkas and President Biden from effecting the policy changes that the Republicans call for all day long, to prevent them from doing so, and then you move to impeach him by saying that he hasn't enacted effective policy to address the border. It is beyond hypocrisy. It is a terrible, terrible case of bad faith. Mr. Roy said that he doesn't want a scalp, because he said that if Secretary Mayorkas came out and said, let's detain everyone, let's clean up the border, he'd be happy. He'd drop the impeachment. Well, that's funny, because I'm pretty sure that Secretary Mayorkas was deeply immersed in negotiating the Senate bill with a bipartisan group of senators that does exactly that. And I don't agree with it. It goes way too far. I think it denies due process for asylum. It takes it out of the judicial system. It puts it purely within the executive branch. It requires asylum applications to be adjudicated in 6 months. There's a 3-month detention period, and then there is a 3-month alternative to detention period, but does not allow people to leave the area. They have eliminated what you all call catch and release. It is a dramatic shift in asylum law and how asylum is done, but it is exactly what Mr. Roy asked for and says that he would be happy to drop the impeachment against Secretary Mayorkas. So finally, I will just conclude by saying that the irony that this House of Representatives would abuse and demean the impeachment clause of the United States based on their own assessment of what a violation of the law is, not a court's determination. The courts have said that, in fact, you must give discretion to the executive branch, Article 2, but based on their own interpretation, no evidence of willfulness or intent. It is simply an inability to adhere to the laws that are set because of a lack of resources. And they are trying, you all on this side of the aisle, the Republicans are trying to impeach Secretary Mayorkas because he failed to address the border literally while he is negotiating necessary and essential legislation in the Senate to address the border. The irony should not be lost on anyone. It is political cynicism at its worst. It demeans the impeachment clause. There is no basis in history or the law to say that any of these allegations rise to the level of any misdemeanor or crime, much less a high crime and misdemeanor, as it was established by the framers. And yet he is even continuing to try to do exactly what you say he hasn't done, and now you're presented with a bill that does many of the things that you want, and you're still going through with impeachment. And we all know there's one reason why, and it is November 2024, and Donald Trump wants to be able to say that Joe Biden did not address the issues at the border so that he can get elected. He would rather have continued chaos at the border than to solve the problems for the American people so that he can win. And unfortunately, there are too many of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle who are going along with it. And it is a sad, sad day in this body's history. Thank you.
Chair has no questions. Go to Mr. Burgess. No questions?